And one thing that our brain is incredibly good at is pattern matching. So whatever provides relief from that discomfort is what we will turn to time and again out of habit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wes Bush, and today I am so happy to have Nir Eyal, who is the author of both Hooked and Indistractable. So I have been reading Nir's books religiously. They are incredible. And one of the things I love about them is he really just understands the customer and what really drives them to, whether it's use products and applications or even stop using them if they are taking control of your life. And so one of the things I love to just start off with is what really got you into writing books in general, Nir?
Yeah, so I write books when I'm looking for an answer I can't find. So that happened with Hooked. I had this hypothesis that as the digital interface shrinks, so as we've seen us go from desktops with big monitors to laptops, to mobile devices, and now to wearable devices and even audible devices. Like if you think about the Amazon Alexa, there is no visual interface, right? There's no screen anymore. And so I had this hypothesis that back when I saw this happening in 2012, that as the interface shrinks, habits become increasingly important. And that a company's competitive advantage increasingly would depend upon their ability to create consumer habits. Because let's face it, if the customer doesn't remember to use your product these days, if you're not, top of mind, then for many products, you might as well not even exist. And so there are all types of competitive advantage, of course. This is what Warren Buffett calls a moat. So you can have intellectual property, you can have brand, you can have economies of scale. One of the most, I think, important types of competitive advantage, and I think one that is increasingly becoming utilized, is this idea of building a habit. For example, if you think about Google, why do we Google things every day, right? Google owns 90% of the search engine market. Is it because they make a better search engine? No. In fact, there's been studies that find that when you show people the search results of Google versus Bing, the number 2 search engine, and you strip out the branding so people can't see whose search results are which, it's a 50-50 preference split. People can't tell the difference between the two. And so why do people search with Google? Why has Googling become a verb? Well, it's because of habit and nothing more. There is nothing more than that habit. And so the incredible advantage of a consumer habit is that once a consumer has that habit in their mind, they have what I call this mind monopoly. They don't even consider the competition, right? So how amazing would that be if people used your product, your service, just out of habit? They used it automatically without even considering the competition. That's how much they liked it. That's how much they benefit from it. And if they could use that out of habit, that would mean that you wouldn't have to spend all that money on expensive advertising. You wouldn't have to send them all those spammy, annoying messages. You could get them to use your product on their own with this habit formed.
Awesome. And I mean, unless you love sending those spammy messages, power to you. For everyone else that wants to think about this a little bit smarter, I completely agree. Having that habit forming product is really powerful. But where do you really start whenever it comes to understanding? Like, obviously, there's the examples of Google and even like Netflix for, okay, I just want to chill and watch Netflix. Like, there's lots of verbs and companies that are kind of owning those terms and building habit forming products. But where do people start?
Yeah. So there are 4 steps to the hook model. It's a trigger, an action, a reward, and finally an investment. And the most important is the first step, which is to understand your consumers' triggers. Now, there are 2 types of triggers. There are, of course, the external triggers, which we just talked about, those annoying messages, the pings, the dings, the rings, which we do have to utilize at first in order to create a customer habit, to start sending people down the 4 steps of the hook model. However, the ultimate goal of a habit forming product is to no longer need those external triggers. The ultimate goal of a habit forming product is that people use a product because they want to, not because they feel like they have to. That's really when we've reached the promised land. And so the most important first step is to understand your customers' internal triggers. Now, internal triggers are these uncomfortable emotional states, these things that we feel that we seek to escape from. And one thing that our brain is incredibly good at is pattern matching. So whatever provides relief from that discomfort is what we will turn to time and again out of habit. So when we think about it, when we feel lonely, what do we go? Where do we go? What app or website? We check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check stock prices, sports scores, the news. We look at Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube. All of these things cater to these uncomfortable emotional sensations. So what that means is for someone building a product or service whose business model requires a habit, if you want that competitive advantage of having your product used out of habit, well, then you have to ask yourself, what is the internal trigger that occurs frequently enough in your user or customer's life? What is that emotional itch? What is that psychological discomfort that they seek to escape that you are going to attach your product's use to? That's the most important place to start.
Awesome. And one of the things you mentioned that I think is so interesting is the internal triggers. And so for a lot of us, we have these internal triggers. And like you mentioned, like we're bored. We might check stock or our stocks or Facebook or some other application where we just naturally go to whenever we're feeling that particular feeling. Like how do people just find, like what are your internal triggers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the book, in Hooked, I talk about different methodologies to do this. There's what's called the 5 whys technique that came out of the Toyota production system, where what we're doing is we're asking ourselves and asking our customers these 5 whys of why they would use a product like ours. And so we don't stop with just the functional why, right? If it's email, it's say, why do you use email? Well, I want to send messages. Why? And if you go down enough whys, you want to figure out what that sensation is, right? So with email, is it, I fear being out of the loop. I'm worried about what's going on at work, right? So when you start hearing emotions, that's when you know you've gotten to the internal triggers. Worry, fear, uncertainty, anxiety, fatigue, loneliness, all of these things are internal triggers. This is the beauty of what we do as product designers, as marketers. We solve people's pain. Right? That is the amazing charge that we have in our business, is that we get to solve people's problems. But you can't deal with those problems effectively unless you get to the root cause, unless you get to the internal trigger, not just the functional level, not just, oh, my customer wants an extra button here or there. That's very superficial. What you want to do is to get to that internal trigger, because it's only when you get to the feeling, when you get to the uncomfortable sensation, that you have your aperture opened up. Because if you start at too high a level, then your solution set is very limited, right? When you say, why do you use this product? Oh, I want to do X, Y, Z. Okay, well, then you're going to design a product that's pretty much like your competitor's product, right? But if you start at the base level, if you understand the feeling, if you understand the sensation that they are trying to escape, well, your option set expands, your aperture opens, and you have many more potential solutions for that problem when you can identify what that problem really is. And for every habit-forming product, it is fundamentally some kind of uncomfortable emotional state. And when you start from that base state, you'll find that there's all kinds of solutions that you can provide, particularly the ones that are the most habit-forming, that we find that something that quickly provides relief, that provides a user a greater sense of agency, control, that scratches that psychological itch quickly and effectively, those are the kind of products that people return to time and time again, and the kind of products that we can build habits on top of, right? So we can build that core habit of, let's say, for it's an enterprise product, for example. My book is just as applicable to enterprise as consumer web products. So let's say checking the dashboard becomes a daily habit. Well, then once you have that habit established, you can layer on additional habits so that over time, now the customer has built a very rich set of behaviors that they do with your product. And of course, that makes the product very sticky. It makes them much less likely to churn. So they're going to keep staying your customer over the long term.
Definitely. And so I think for a lot of people, I think you hit on the nail on the head for the first part, where it was just describing like what a lot of companies do, where it's just describing, here's the functional outcome that we're going to help you with. And I think if you do aspire to just solving that, like it is so easy to become commoditized so quickly, especially nowadays, where it is so easy to create a lot of solutions, especially in the B2B SaaS space where a lot of the audience is in right now. And so for the other side of that, where it's talking more about the social and the even emotional outcomes that your product can solve for and how you can do that, how do you really understand like what it is that your product can do in addition to the functional outcomes?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. So we talked about the 5 whys technique. Another thing we can do is to look for nascent behaviors. So what is the customer currently doing with other solutions that is not good enough? So many times when I meet with startups, I'm an active angel investor. I've invested in dozens of companies now. And many times when I hear companies pitching their products, and I'll ask them, how does the customer currently solve this problem? They'll say, oh, there is no solution to this problem. And they think that's a good thing. And I'm always a little skeptical about that, because what does it probably mean if the customer doesn't have any way to solve this problem? It probably means it's not a problem. So what you want to do is to look for what the customer is currently doing to solve this problem in a way that it requires too much effort. It's too laborious. There's too much friction. It's not satisfying enough. It doesn't really solve the problem. And then figure out how your solution can solve that problem in a much better way. But to get to answer that question, don't just stop with the functional answer. Start with the real consumer need. And that has to be something that occurs with sufficient frequency. So the number one reason that I don't invest in a company is because that's trying to form a habit. That's kind of my specialty, is I look for products both in enterprise, SaaS, consumer web, anything that needs repeat consumer engagement. That's my sweet spot. And the number one reason I will not invest in a company is because that behavior does not occur with sufficient frequency. So that's very, very important. So it's almost impossible to change a consumer habit if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad business. It just means that you have to acquire customers and keep customers in a different way. And not every business has to be habit forming. There's all kinds of competitive advantages. Many products don't lend themselves to be habit forming. For example, if you sell insurance, if you sell, some kind of enterprise software that's installed on a server farm somewhere and nobody uses it unless something disastrous happens, well, then you don't need a habit. You need a one-time sale. And so that doesn't require a habit. The problem is if you don't have a habit or some kind of other competitive advantage, then it's very easy for the competition to swoop in and take your customer away, right? They basically beat you up on price and features all day long. And so you're competing on those two aspects as opposed to having this consumer lock-in once you have a habit. Once a product is utilized every day, once a week, when it's a product that people interact with a lot, that's the kind of product that's very difficult to unseat. So when you think about Slack in the enterprise, GitHub, Salesforce, once you invest in one of these products, it's kind of sticky. It's hard to leave one of these products because you formed a consumer habit around it.